Grateful that you've taken time out from your very busy routines to attend the launch of a very difficult sounding book, the Quantum Book of Soma, reinterpreting the wisdom of the Vedas. So that's quite a mouthful. That's quite a mouthful, but I hope to exercise what in the army we were taught as simplification skills. You know, if you take a complex topic, your job is to make it simple. And in the army, our job was to make it simple and to make it work. So, uh, I do hope that by the time I finish this small presentation, I would have demystified the Vedas a little. The simple fact is why this book and why now? Very unfortunately, the Indic civilization is under concerted attack. If you recall, just about last month, 45 universities in the United States got together to hold a conference on, hold your breath, dismantling Hindutva. Dismantling Hindutva. It was a very thinly disguised attempt to, to demonize a religion that I think has been one of the most peaceful religions on this earth. And we talk of the Jewish Holocaust, but I would like to remind people of the Hindu Holocaust. 100 million Hindus, Indians, people of Indic origin, were slaughtered from the 10th to about the 16th century. Slaughtered is the word. And I do hope that, the attempts at defending ourselves will not now be construed to try and attack this religion and paint it as some kind of a Talibanized outfit. But that is being done. The people of Indic origin have been driven out of Afghanistan, they are driven out of Kashmir, and we are now on the verge of having trouble in Bangladesh. So where does it all end? Purva Paksha, Paksha, Purva Paksha. That is the classical way of debating, disputing in the Indic religion, methodology. But I will not go Paksha and Purva Paksha. I will say I am just trying to put across the Indic narrative as it is. Carbon dating places this religion somewhere around 9500 before present. If you go by Bharuch, the radiocarbon dating of Bharuch, it goes back to 9500 before present. And that was around the time when these Vedas were received. They are all Parushaya. That means I did not write them. None of the rishis said I wrote them. I received them. The rishis are supposed to be mantra drishtas. They saw the verses. They heard the verses. In the pristine silence of that early era, that illute tempora which existed at that stage, when their minds were quietened, when the cortical portions of your brains were quietened, in the great silence, they felt these inspirations. And the Indian philosophical outlook towards these inspiration is Jo jaga tvam richa kamayante. These divine richas, these divine inspirations are free floating in the atmosphere. And they are seeking those awakened minds where they can be born. Those richas seek out these minds which are awakened, which have awakened to a deeper reality, and there they take birth. It's like a lightning conductor rod. The individual acts like a lightning conductor rod to draw these inspirations from the infosphere, from that Vigyanmaya Kosh, and bring it down to terra firma. That is how the Vedas came to us. The ages were put by Max Muller at 1500 BC, which today turns out to be a bit of a joke. I'm afraid Max Muller may have been white, but he did not have access to radiocarbon dating. He did not have access to satellite imagery. He did not have access to a whole host of scientific data which is now available. So that is why this book, and the purpose of this book is to highlight to you the terrific scientific outlook of the Vedic rishis 10,000 years from today. That is what I shall be talking about in this book, the Quantum Book of Soma, and I shall explain why quantum, because the similarity of the Vedic teachings with quantum mechanics is startling, is amazing. The findings of the Vedas and that of neurobiology, the cutting edge in neurobiology, is absolutely, they are saying the same thing. So this is a religion with an open architecture. Unlike Abrahamic religions, we do not go for certitudes that this is the truth, and if you don't believe it, I will slit your throat. Those are the kind of certitudes that we are up against. And that is why it is amazing that of all the religions, this is the religion that is being called now Talibanized. We have enough actual Talibans out there so that not to this thing. But the problem is a concerted civilizational assault. Concerted, planned, very methodical civilizational attack to demonize a people, a billion people, a faith. And I thought we had suffered enough. The Jew Holocaust, very, very frankly, pales into insignificance before the Holocaust that took place on India. It is traditional that at the very outset, that's my guru. On the left screen, you'll see Swami Pranavananda Saraswati. And traditionally, you start with an invocation to your guru, by bowing your head to your guru, because it was he who set me on this path 50 years back. This book has been 50 years in the making. He was an engineer. He was working in a multinational as a manager. At the age of 27, he was the only heir to that entire family fortune and business. He chucked it all up and he came to a remote forest in Maharashtra, in the triangle formed by the caves of Ajanta, Ellora, Pittalkhora or Pitangalya Vihar. It's such a meditative place, right? And I was set upon this journey by him. I just would like to start with a brief incident which will set it all in context, set the whole book in context. I learned meditation from him. 74, I had met him for the first time when I was a young captain. I learned meditation from him. And then every year I used to go there to practice meditation. 10, 15 days under his guidance. Get up at 3:30, 4 in the morning, quick bath in the cold, under that hand pump, and then off to the temple to meditate. So one fine day when I had gone to his ashram, I had been meditating for quite some days, and I could then go up to 7 hours at a stretch. 7 hours, that's thanks to his grace. He was around. I can't do it now. And one fine day I finished my meditation. It was early, the sun had just come out. Very pleasant, limpid winter sunshine. And I suddenly felt like taking a walk in the forest. Dense forest, deep silence, right? And there was a dry nala bed, dry stream bed, and on both sides of it there were trees forming a tunnel of vegetation, right? So without thinking much, I started walking down that tunnel. Middle of that tunnel, I suddenly stopped. There was a tree to the right. It had full of white flowers. I don't know what those flowers are, but on each flower there were at least 10, 20, 50 bees. Bees, honey bees. And they were humming, Just by the way, The purest sound of Om is by the bees. The purest sound of Om is by the bees. The clearest enunciation of the Pranav mantra is done by the bees. I just couldn't move forward. I just got rooted to the spot and I just kept listening. And as I listened to that humming sound, I felt like, you've all seen an aquarium. You all seen aquarium, the aquarium has a pipe, and from the pipe the bubbles keep coming out. Smaller, bigger, and it plops, comes to the surface. And I felt bubbles rising up inside me. And then suddenly I felt ecstasy. I had felt euphoria before, bliss before, because early mornings in the forest, it's so calm, it's so quiet, and you just feel happy for no rhyme or reason. You just are happy, you want nothing, you need nothing, you are at peace. And as my guru used to say, the continuum is, we first feel sukh, then we feel shanti, the shanti deepens into bliss, the bliss goes into euphoria, and one fine day, if you are lucky, the euphoria will erupt in ecstasy. There's nothing that I have experienced before or after which quite compares or matches up with what happened then. I was at a loss what to do. I rushed to my guru's hut, but the hut was locked because he was meditating and nobody disturbed him when he was meditating. So I didn't know whom to ask, mere ko ho kya raha. So in any case, I went to my hut where I was staying. That was the guest hut, 3 huts in all in that ashram. And I whipped out my diary and I started trying to record it. And as I started writing, tuck, 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 and suddenly with a thud I came back to normal consciousness. And I felt like an orange which has been sucked out, drained out of every single drop of juice. I felt so dry and I really was desperate to get back to that state. But when it was gone. So, much later, to cut a story short because he has to go, I could go on and on. But, to cut the story short, I asked him what had happened. And he said, you just experienced what is written in the Vedas as Soma. Ecstasy. Soma. Soma is a meta concept, you see. So, and this book is about that Soma, the last unresolved riddle of Indology. Search for the mythical Vedic Soma. What was this Soma? The 9th mandala of the Rig Veda is devoted entirely to this magical Soma, right? But it is like the Bij mantra. You see, Om is a Bij mantra. Aim is a Bij mantra. Reem is a Bij mantra. And you know that in that little word, there is a whole spectrum, a whole range of meanings. So Soma is like that. In that one word, there is a whole spectrum of diverse and amazingly different meanings, so there are many types of Soma. There is, to start with, the botanical Soma. Soma as a psychotropic plant. The Rig Veda describes how that plant was collected, how, it was crushed in mortar and stone, how it was built by the fingers to take out the juice, how the juice was strained in wool, through wool into copper kalash, dron kalash. And then how it was offered to the gods as Homa. And how it was drunk in sacrament. And anybody who drank that Soma went into ecstasy, into bliss. He turned creative. He had remarkable insights, which in the normal state he could never have ever been able to achieve those insights. That was the magic of Soma. But that's not where it ends. There is an entirely different aspect to Soma. Soma was not just required by the Rig Vedic Rishi, the seer. It was also needed by the Aryan warrior. Anybody who drank Soma lost all fear. He went into ecstasy. Now there is an either or thing between ecstasy and fear. You see, if you study your brain's, construction, The limbic system, ecstasy is here and fear is here. So either ecstasy is functional or fear. You can't have both. You'll never have both. So anybody who goes into ecstasy goes beyond pain. आप उसको तलवार से काट रहे हैं and he is still at it. There are these stories of the chap कि वो उसका सर धड़ से काट दिया, वो हाथ में पकड़ के वो चले जा रहा है. He just not felt the pain. So you lose all fear, you lose all panic, and you get ecstatic in the middle of a battlefield. Now, can you imagine the combat effectiveness of such a elixir? फौज में लड़ाई के पहले एक टॉट घूंट रम का दे दिया करते थे. And generally people used to drink more and then it used to get worse because it dilates your pores and when it gets very cold you could get frostbite and all this. So rum doesn't work, I'm sorry. Rum lat jandi hai. And to sweep, I'll say this, I think one of the best descriptions of Soma came from Guru Nanak Dev Ji. There is that little story of how Babar had heard of the great saint and he invited him to his court. And he heard his discourse and he was deeply impressed. Babur the emperor was deeply impressed. So he patted, the seat next to his throne. Aap idhar aiye. He was so happy with him, So when he came there, he with his own hands offered him a bowl and then he picked up that goblet of wine, the best of wines from Persia, and he started pouring. So Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, no. There was a gasp of horror from the court. How dare this impudent, fakir, he is refusing drink by the emperor, Mughal emperor. So Babar's one eyebrow arched. He says, you don't drink? He said, yes, I do, my lord. But he said, then what's the problem? Aap lijiye. He said, no, but he says, look, if this is not good enough, आप बाबर की कोर्ट में हैं साहब, आप बताइए कहां का वाइन चाहिए आपको, बुखारा, सामरकंद, इधर उधर, it will be brought to you. You are in Babar's court, emperor's court. He said, नाम खुमारी नानका चढ़ी रहे दिन रात. This is the very excellent shloka that came out of him was Naam Khumari Nanka Chadi Rahe Din Raat. The drink that I drink and get drunk is the name of the Lord. Have you understood? It is the name of the Lord that gets me high on my own supply. This has come from within. I haven't taken anything from outside. I don't need anything from outside. Naam Khumari Nanka Chadi Rahe. The drink that you take, then it goes down and then you have a terrible hangover the next day. There are no hangovers with me. So the drink that I take is the name of the Lord. The ecstasy that comes from the name of the Lord. This is, I think, one of the best definitions of Soma. And that is why the Sikh military brotherhood fought so well and fought so hard. Because Purza, Purza, kat mare, kabau na chhade, khet purza. That means in that ecstasy of the name of the Lord, you will go through the battlefield even if you are torn limb by limb. But you will not feel the pain, you will not feel this thing. That, sir, is Soma. So it was required by the warrior, it was required by the rishi, it was required by the saint. Right? So there's one psychotropic Soma. Soma is a psychotropic plant. The second view of Soma was biological Soma. There is so much research in neurobiology today. In the brain, when the brain thinks you are dying, and you know what they did? They actually induced heart attacks in rats. Rats are also mammals, quite similar to us. They induced heart attacks in rats and then they measured what were the neurochemicals that were secreted in the brain, in the dying brain. The dying brain goes overactive in one final burst. You've all heard of people who were drowning who saw their whole life, in one flash. So that brain becomes overacting and what are the things that it secretes? Endorphins, enkephalins. What are endorphins, enkephalins? Opiates of the brain. They give you ecstasy, they take away pain. They take away pain. This is a species survival mechanism. A caveman attacked by a tiger, he can't run. You can't outrun the tiger. You don't have that kind of musculature. So what do you do? But if you lose your mind, panic. Panic is a disorganizing emotion. But what happens in this thing is when the brain to save you starts secreting endorphins, enkephalins, serotonin, dopamine. These are all chemicals which give you a high, which take away the pain, which are like opiates, right? And then that man is calm. Then he can look around. Then he can pick up that burning log of wood and then fight the tiger to save his family. He may die in the bargain, but he'll have saved his family. So, this is a species survival mechanism. When we meditate, we close our eyes, we create darkness, you fool the brain into thinking it is dying. Have you understood? And then you secrete those very chemicals which will give you that high, which will give you that ecstasy. And once this starts, coming, it is self-reinforcing. Quite obviously, if there is reward, I press certain triggers in my brain and there is reward. So I'll go for it again and again, and I'll lengthen my meditations to hours and hours. So like I said, Soma is a meta concept. There is a very nice shloka in the Jabala Upanishad, which says, Agni Stomakam Jagat. The whole world is formed of two elements, Agni, Soma. Just like yin, yang. Agni is exploding, expanding, outward propulsion. Soma is gravitation, cosmic crunch. Big Bang, cosmic crunch. Sneha Tattva, gravitation. This is what draws the proton to the electron or the electron to the proton. This is what keeps the planets with the sun. This is Soma. This is the power of gravitation, Sona. And what helps you to recognize, your father, your mother, your wife in another incarnation? Why do you suddenly feel inclined towards a certain person? Sneha Tattva, Soma. From life to life this Soma goes. So the whole world is formed of two elements, Agni, Soma. Then there is the quantum concept of Soma, of which I shall talk, and which is related to the Soma of sight. The act of seeing generates the world, right? And then there is, just like, you have Indra is the lord of the Indriyas. Indra is the lord of the Indriyas. There are the Gyan Indriyas, eyes, ears, from where you sort of gain knowledge, and there are the Karma Indriyas. So just like, when you look the right way, and I shall explain that a little, when you look the right way, the Soma will start flowing. You will feel happy. That is when you take yourself, okay, imagine this. It has actually happened. You're traveling in an aeroplane, you're sitting next to the window, you suddenly look out. You're relaxed. You're not looking for any particular thing. There is no response of like, dislike. I'm just seeing the clouds. Lovely, beautiful cumulonimbus clouds. And below that there is a river snaking its way, and there is green and there is lush. And you are focusing on infinity. And suddenly you will find, try it sometimes. This is the yoga of flying, right? And we all fly these days. You suddenly feel a vague feeling of happiness to start with. And then that deepens into bliss, into euphoria. And then you suddenly feel surges of poetry. What you're seeing, you just turn into words, And I used to whip out this thing and start writing poetry. And sometimes I found that the air hostesses were rather surprised to see a 70-year-old soldier with his nose glued to the window pane, like a little kid. But you have to be like a little kid if you want to get that euphoria, that bliss, that high, that Soma of seeing. When you look choicelessly, without the response of I like, dislike, acceptance, rejection, hot, cold, pair of opposites, dvanda, teeth, then you get into that somatic condition. And then there is the Soma of action. You see, Soma is ecstasy, Soma is joy, Anything that gives you joy is soma. You like this particular food and you are, when I used to be in my guru's ashram, they used to serve a cup of tea, hot cup of tea somewhere around 11 or 11:30 or so. Believe you me, that cup of tea used to taste like nectar. On that sense vector, you are touching that same high, that same central ecstasy. And in life, if I do what we all have dharma. Okay, I am a soldier, my duty to fight. Swadharma is when I enjoy that fighting. As a kid, I used to box. As a kid, I used to play with little, toy pistols. And it is just that you've grown up, you've still not outgrown that fascination for war and fighting because you enjoy it. An artist, does he have to be forced to paint? Does a sculptor have to be forced to sculpt statues? Does a poet have to be forced to write poetry? Does an artist have to be forced to paint? He enjoys it. If you let him be, he'll do it all his life. He'll pay you to let him do that work. So if you identify, this is my life's calling, this is now will become my life's work. अरे साहब, आपसे ज्यादा खुश कोई बंदा हो सकता है? You are living in soma. That is what is karma yoga. This is what is the desireless action. Because I just enjoy that action. Perfection. When I weave my sword, when I pull that arrow, there is nobody who can do it better. And because I like it, I do it more and more and more, and I become better and better and better. So soma, the enjoyment that comes from work, that is the soma of action. And last is the soma of love. If soma is sneha tattva, if snoma is gravitation, attraction, right, then it goes from life to life. It is this that lasts from life to life. So these are the various types of soma. And now, so like I said, at the physical level, it was thought to be a plant. But some writers felt that about 40,000 years from now, in the cave, if you study the cave art of the world, and very amazing how things happen. My daughter is was very fascinated by the Bhimbetka caves. So this year, we decided to go to the Bhimbetka caves and see those cave paintings. Cave paintings are found all over the world, in Europe, Africa, Asia, wherever. Suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, there was a sudden burst of creativity in cave art. And they attributed to these people eating psychotropic plants. Because that art is amazing. Some of those horses' paintings on the cave walls are stupendous. So they said this has happened because of that. And then the speculation is, in the later Stone Age, 40,000 to 10,000, around this period, when they started ingesting this, they got that quantum jump and they started receiving those Shruti. The Vedic verses started coming to them. So, therefore it was felt that yes, it is a plant. And when you read the 9th mandala, it is plain as daylight they are talking of a plant. So now the question is, which plant? Because if you and I can have it, boy, we are there. Gordon Wasson, a German botanist, felt it was a brilliant red mushroom. Why talk about it? I'll show you the photograph. Just take a look at this photograph. This is one of the prettiest things that you will see. And to my military friends, I don't know if you ever saw it in Ooty and in Wellington, under the pine trees, this used to grow. Beautiful, bright red mushroom with white spots. Gordon Wasson, the German botanist, says this was soma. How did he come to it? He says, from the clues in the Rigvedic mantras devoted to soma, I built a morphological picture. It is the color of the Asuric color. Asura color is red. The Asuric color. It sheds the Asuric color. Those white spots, the red kernel falls away. And on a full moonlight, this mushroom is dazzling white. This mushroom is psychotropic. So this was one candidate for soma. The second candidate for soma is this ephedra bush. This is found in Afghanistan. It's found in Ladakh, Western Tibet, northwestern quadrant of Kashmir, ephedra. The Chinese called it Mr. K.M. Ved, a very distinguished gentleman who spent all his life in trying to unravel the secret of Soma. Then one fine day he came to my house and he said, you know, GD, I've solved it. I've found the Soma plant. So I said, can you show it to me? He said, no, wait, I'll first write it, I'll get it published. Only then will I share this knowledge with anyone, because if it goes out, well, you know, that's the thing. Unfortunately, he died. And then I kept going to that family. I said, look, somewhere in his papers, somewhere in his notes, he must be having that on that plant. By the time the termites had done their job, there are lots of termites in Dehradun, and that secret has died with him. But this was the kind of plant, green creeper veil, lata. Som ko lata kaha jata Vedon mein. So this is the third candidate for Soma. And do you know something? This Soma is not just found in India, it's found in Siberia, it's found in China, it's found in South America. On the left is a statue which was found in Harappa. If you see the headdress closely, it has got those dots. It is the same mushrooms, the red mushrooms. And if you see that, that mushroom in the center, that is Amanita muscaria that I showed you, and that is a South American doll found in the Andes. And that also is got a mushroom on top. Just look on top, it's got the mushroom. Right? Some more. There is a South American shaman turning into a jaguar. And that happens when he eats this magical mushroom. You can see it coming out of his head. You can see that mushroom coming out of his head. India, South America, Siberia, China, Australian shamans. Now the Buddha experimented with mushrooms, by the way. The Buddha experimented with mushroom, lilies, blue lotuses. The term lotus eater comes from there. Right? And, there were a number of, Buddhic iconography mein, there are a lot of chhatris. So people thought ये तो umbrella है, उनके shade के लिए लगा है. These are mushrooms in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. ये देखिए, वो बुद्ध के ऊपर मशरूम है. वो जो स्टैचू के ऊपर वो जो होल्ड किया है वो मशरूम है. It's not an umbrella. वो साउथ अमेरिकन है. So it is a worldwide cult, the cult of the plant, the sacred plant. So this was the what is called the botanical Soma. Now we'll talk quickly of the biological Soma. Biological Soma, they said Soma is endogenous. What is the meaning of the word endogenous? It is produced by the body and brain. You meditate, sir, you will get the flow of Soma. It doesn't require any outside agency. Now, in my own personal experience, and in India they go by personal experience, that is the touchstone. Does it work for me? How did I get it? I had to take no plants. My guru had to take no plants. He just meditated, and every morning you could see him on that high. Ecstatic. When I described to him my experience, all that he did was he just smiled. Smile is a very classical answer technique in Indian mysticism. So he said, now do you know how I have spent 12 years in this forest alone? I don't read the newspaper, I don't watch TV, and when guys like you come, I keep wishing when he will go. Ye kab jayega? Because I am thoroughly enjoying myself and I don't need any external agency. So it is endogenous, it is not exogenous. My personal experiences, it is endogenous. The later Vedas do not talk of plants. Even the identity of the Soma plant was lost by then because of overuse. Yes, my theory is to kickstart, you did use psychotropic plants. But then you felt that you didn't need it any longer. And that is what the Vedas said. But when the Buddha came, he says, no, I reject the authority of the Vedas. There are no dogma. We will find out. Monks, don't believe if the wise men ask you to believe. Don't believe because the book says so. Try it for yourself and then believe. So he actually tried these, and then you find the great difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is, what? What is the ground state of consciousness? In Hinduism, it is described as Satchidanand. Sat, truth. I have never felt anything more real. Chit, it is conscious. I have not gone into anesthesia. It is Ananda. It is Soma. Indra, Agni, Soma. Indra is the truth. Agni is consciousness. Chit, actually not chitta, chiti. It is conscious and it is ecstatic. The experience of the ground state is ecstatic. So, biological soma is that way. And now, like I said, we have found lots of chemicals that the brain secretes. One is called, of course, endorphins, enkephalins, I told you. Other is DMT. Now, those of you who study the literature, who are following this in the West, DMT is supposed to be the God molecule. Dimethyltryptamine. This is the God molecule which gives insights, which gives, highs, which gives you, mystic experiences. And this starts secreting when you meditate or when you think you are in great danger. Right? So these are mood elevators. Also engenders complete absence of fear. The endorphins strengthen our immunological memory and serve to slow down the aging process. Now let me tell you the most wondrous thing about Soma. There is a verse in the Rig Veda which says, the cows that were old became young again. Suniye sahab, this is the fountain of youth. Anybody who takes Soma will not age. Why did Parshuram was around in the times of the Ramayana? He was around in the times of the Mahabharata and he is still supposed to be somewhere in the mountains. So how did he get that age? Shri Aurobindo was working on this, engendering this Soma, in the terms of the descent of the supermind. On making even the physical instrument not just long-lived, but virtually immortal. Soma can do that because it strengthens your immunological memory, it slows down the aging process, and then you have these rishis going on for years and years and years. So Soma has a lot going for it. Look for Soma. Look for Soma. Now let me get to the quantum aspect. I'll quickly finish this up, wind this up, because I know I'm holding a very dear friend hostage, but just bear with me a little more. In the 1930s, the mechanistic Newtonian model of physics had collapsed and quantum mechanics came to the fore. And quantum mechanics created a complete revolution. It started with the explorations into the nature of light. And they said light is a wave, light is also a particle. Sometimes it behaves as a wave, sometimes it behaves as a particle. You zoom on the particle aspect, the wave aspect goes out, and vice versa. So it is a wavicle. Now tell me, this is a total paradox. It's a wave, it's a particle. It's also a particle, it's also a wave. It's a wavicle. So quantum mechanics abounds in paradoxes like this, wavicle. So do the Vedas and Upanishads. He is the furthest, he is the nearest. He is the biggest, he is the smallest. Paradox, paradoxical logic in quantum mechanics and in Vedic and Upanishadic physics. So this has created a paradigm shift in science. Now quantum mechanics says there is no such thing like a purely objective observation. You cannot leave out the observing consciousness from the act of observation. And without something, without an observing consciousness, there is no observation. साहब बाहर कुछ नहीं है जब तक कोई उसको देखने वाला नहीं. There is nothing, I mean, this is science. I'm not talking of what philosophy says. I'm talking of what science says. And today, modern physics is struggling with what is called the hard problem. There is an easy problem and there is a hard problem. Easy problem is how many galaxies, what is the composition, what is that. By and large, we've cracked it. Hard problem, is what? What is the nature of consciousness? Consciousness hai kya bala? How do I see the red in the red flower? Simple questions are, but all your top physicists today are working on this hard problem. Thousands of years ago, ladies and gentlemen, the Vedic and Upanishadic seers had cracked the hard problem of physics. Their methodology was so simple. You want to know what consciousness is? You are conscious. Look within yourself. आपको दूसरी लेबोरेटरी क्यों चाहिए? अरे साहब, आप कॉन्शियसनेस जानना चाहते हैं ना, आप कॉन्शियस हैं. You don't need another laboratory. You are the laboratory. Look within yourself. Try and touch the ground state of consciousness. They concluded that there were two levels of our identity. मैं कौन हूं? This is one of the biggest Upanishadic meditations. Who am I? क्या मैं ये अन्नमय कोश हूं? क्या मैं प्राणमय कोश हूं? क्या मैं मनोमय कोश हूं? मैं क्या हूं सब? So वो दे कंक्लूडेड देयर वर टू लेवल्स. एक वेदों में बहुत अच्छा एक श्लोक है. टू बर्ड्स गोल्डन कंपेनियन सखा सुपर्ण सखाया, दे सिट ऑन द ब्रांचेस ऑफ द सेम ट्री. वन ईट्स द बिटर स्वीट फ्रूट, द अदर वॉचेस ईट्स नॉट. ये एक इमेजिक कंस्ट्रक्ट है वेदास का. And all schools of philosophy, by the way, Dvait, Advait, Vishishtadvait, they all come from this one imagic picture. What exactly of the two birds on the tree? So there is a part of my being which is uninvolved, and there is a part of my being which suffers, gets into this thing, cries, angry, this, that, and the rest of it. You see, this is the ego, body form based ego. This ego is based upon my body form. It is like the anchor I use to make sense of this world. It splits the world into a drishta, into a seer and a seen. And this was the basis of all duality. My fixation on the body form based ego. And my fear comes from if I lose my form, my body, when I'm gone. Is that so? That is what the Vedas started observing thousands of years ago. Their astonishing discovery was that the ego was just the surface level noise, the instrument we use to make sense of our everyday experience. It was this ego which split us into the seer and the seen, the subject and the object. So they started going neti, neti, neti. Not this is the self, not this is the self, not this. Now I'll start going deeper and deeper into myself for the real source of the I, the aliveness in me. कौन हूं मैं साहब? कहां है? Where does it stop? So you start going deeper and deeper into your consciousness to get to the ground state of consciousness. And this was, now the scientists are calling it the quantum level of the self. That was non-local. That means it can be here, it can be there, it can be here at the same time. It's not localized. It's non-local. Beyond space and time. It was the level of unity and synthesis. The Vedic seers called this quantum self the Atman, that which goes from life to life. Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. It does not die with the death of the body. That is the Atman. The body form complex is, mortal, decays with age, dies. The quantum self is immortal. It carries the memories of previous births in a non-local way. It is the Jat Veda. ये आपने कई बारी वैदिक श्लोकों में सुना होगा. जात वेदा. Jat Veda means the knower of all the births that you have had. Millions of births. Perhaps as an insect, perhaps as a snake, now as a mammal, now as a horse, now this, now as an elephant, now as a human. इसकी मेमोरी सारी जात वेदा. Jat Veda. So that was now when they touch the ground state, the ultimate state of who I am, my consciousness, they verbalized it as Sat Chidanand. Sat Chidanand. It is Sat, it is Chit, it is Anand. And this is where, when the Buddha said, no, I don't accept it, and he went back to the psychotropic plants, and when he touched the ground state of the consciousness, you know what the Buddhists call it? The great Shunyat. The utter zero that contains everything. And believe you me, if some of you have tried meditation, you do sometimes get the feelings of the utter zero. And yet that zero paradoxically has everything. Shunyat. So the Buddhist feeling of the ground state of consciousness is Shunyat, which is quite close to David Bohm's physics, new physics. But in ours, it was Satchidananda. We didn't lose consciousness. We retained consciousness. So there is a far deeper level of our quantum selves. The quantum self, the Vedic sages said, is the same in all of us. They said, how do I see the world? What does quantum mechanics say? They say there are waves of probability. The moment you select one out of the millions of waves of probability or possibility, there is a quantum collapse of all the rest, and the one that you have selected actualizes. Therefore, for anything to exist, it has to be seen by consciousness, because consciousness selects. Now the question comes, Are sahab, main bhi conscious, aap bhi conscious, aap bhi conscious. How come we are all seeing the same hall? Why don't I see a different hall? Why don't I see a different tree, different mountain? It is because you do not see, sir, from the surface level of your consciousness, where you are different. You see it from a unitary level of consciousness, where like spokes converge at the nave of a wheel, we are all one. That consciousness is the same. That consciousness is the same all over the globe. The Vedic and Upanishadic deep insights into the nature of the quantum self and its relation to the cosmic consciousness is summarized in 4 Vedic Mahavakyas. The first is Prajnanam Brahma. You know what is Pragya? Pragya is consciousness. Consciousness is Brahman. Right? I am Atma Brahma. मैं, ये जो मेरी आत्मा है, वही ब्रह्म है. This individualized consciousness is the same in every human being, in every creature. Not just that it is not homocentric. Everything that lives or breathes is conscious. And that consciousness is the same in all of us. It was truly an astonishing insight for that early era into the nature of consciousness per se. It intuited the hologramic relationship between the individual Atman and the universal Brahman. Here was the part that contained the whole picture. And then of course the other Mahavakya is Aham Brahmasmi. When a man is meditating, and when he suddenly touches that, he gets that oceanic feeling of expansion. I am everywhere. हर जगह तो मैं ही हूँ. अहम ब्रह्म, मैं ब्रह्म हूँ, मैं ही ब्रह्म हूँ. और जब वो निकलता है अपनी मेडिटेशन से, tat tvam asi. The word tat is a beautiful word in Vedic mantras. Tat savitur varenyam. We know the Gayatri mantra by heart. What does the Gayatri mantra talk of? It's not talking of this sun that you can see. It's talking of that sun that arises from the darkness within, the Atman. And when it rises, my God, what a sunrise. What a sunrise. Tat savitur. Tat tvamasi. That you are. That you are. These are some of the very amazing glimpses of the Vedic philosophy. I've just given you a few teasers. This book is 430 pages long, and it took me 50 years to write it. 50 years of not just reading, but reflection, meditation, experience. I tried to base it on that. Thank you very much for a patient listening. I hope you like the book.